The Wizards may be surprised at their first-round exit to the Toronto Raptors, but exactly how they perished should not be surprising at all. Their shortcomings were familiar and indicative of their biggest problems from this season and from yesteryear. Though Markieff Morris said the Wizards were the better team in the fallout of their Game 6 loss on Friday night, there are a handful of reasons to argue otherwise. Most notably, it was the Raptors' depth that helped carry them past Washington and into the second round. The whole series demonstrated this fact. The Raptors were missing point guard Fred VanVleet, one of the NBA's best bench players, yet they still rolled a deeper rotation than the Wizards, and with impressive success, VanVleet's replacement, Delon Wright, scored 18 points in both Game 1 and 5 and shot 46.7% from 3 in the series. C.J. Miles scored a combined 30 points in the first 2 games to help lead the Raptors to a 2-0 series lead. Other bench players like Pascal Siakam and Jakob Poeltl did their part, rebounding the ball and scoring when needed with efficiency. Game 6 was a perfect example of their depth advantage. While John Wall and Bradley Beal each logged 40-plus minutes, the Raptors' star guards DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry played 33 and 31 minutes, respectively, in a playoff game, a closeout game. "You'll never expect your guys, your starting backcourt, to do that," Lowry said of his and DeRozan's minutes, "but that's how our team is built. On any given night our bench can do that. There's been nights where I'd only play 24 minutes. Throughout the season, our bench has won games." The Wizards now enter the offseason with questions about their depth. The absence of Otto Porter, who had a minor procedure on his left leg in the hours before Game 6, did not tell the entire story. Wall and Beal scored 30 of the Wizards' 39 second-half points. They did not have help when the season was on the line. This was in some respects a reprise of last season's final game when the Wizards' bench amassed only 5 points in a Game 7 loss to the Celtics. The Wizards' second unit was outscored 34-20 by Toronto Game 6. The Wizards' bench was better this season, but how much better? It's certainly not on the level of Toronto's. The Wizards and Raptors have taken very different philosophies towards the draft in recent years. The Wizards have traded 3 of their first-round picks for veterans that can help them win now, like Morris, Marcin Gortat and Bojan Bogdanovic, who left in free agency this past summer. Those deals have all worked out to varying degrees, and could be argued as smart moves. The Raptors, on the other hand, have held on to those first-round picks and flooded their bench with young, high-ceiling players who Dwayne Casey has coached up to contribute very quickly. That approach has worked very well for them. Wright, Siakam, Poeltl and starting forward Anunoby were all selected in the first round in the past 3 years. The only first-round pick the Wizards can boast during that stretch is Kelly Oubre Jr., who was Porter's replacement in Game 6 and had an uneven series, all things considered. More depth, particularly when it comes to scorers, would allow the Wizards to overcome the loss of a player like Porter's. They were able to do so for much of the regular season, as Wall missed 41 games. But their depth couldn't earn them more than the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference, and that contributed to their early demise. What ultimately did them in more specifically was a problem that plagued them all throughout their head-scratching regular season that was characterized by profound highs and lows. They stopped passing and playing as a collective unit. The Wizards, who turned the ball over 14 times, had only 12 assists as a team. That's only a few more than the 9.6 that Wall averaged during the regular season. It was the fewest assists in a game for the Wizards since Dec. 4 and their fewest in a playoff game since May 9, 2014 in their second-round series against the Pacers, 12 assists. That speaks for itself, Morris said. The fourth quarter was when they were at their worst. They had only 3 assists in the frame and shot 25%. They scored 14 points as a team, their worst postseason quarter also since that Pacers game in 2014. They hadn't scored 14 or less in any quarter since February 28 against the Warriors. Some of the things that happened in the fourth quarter have been happening throughout the year, head coach Scott Brooks said. "We just had trouble scoring, making shots, we turned the ball over, we gave up offensive rebounds. In crunch time, the Wizards' offense was shut off like a faucet. Wall and Beal were left to do everything on their own and they didn't have the wherewithal or the legs to pull it off. The Raptors had too much artillery and the Wizards were overmatched when it counted most." NBC Sports Washington is on Apple News. Favorite us. The Wizards' offseason arrived abruptly on Friday night, as it always seems to do. They had high hopes for the 2017-18 season, but due to problems both in their control and out of their hands, their summer came early. There are nearly 5 months until training camp begins in Richmond, Virginia, and a lot that will happen during that time. Here are 5 questions for the Wizards. They look ahead to another off-season of change. Will they make any organizational changes? Anytime a team falls short of expectations in professional sports, it is fair to question whether front office changes will be made, either major or minor. The Wizards have kept their staff relatively intact since team president Ernie Grunfeld took over in June of 2003. They stuck with him during 2 rebuilds, first when he took over and second when they drafted John Wall in 2010. They also kept him and his staff around after the 2015-16 season when they missed the playoffs and fired head coach Randy Whitman. Given they didn't overhaul their front office then, it's easy to see why they wouldn't do so now. Head coach Scott Brooks is only 2 years into a 5-year contract worth $35 million. He's not going anywhere, and the relationship between a coach and front office is always important. It's not often a front office is transformed when everyone knows the coach is here for the foreseeable future. The Wizards also have the built-in excuse of how injuries affected this season. Wall missed 41 games, Markieff Morris began the year on the mend, and Otto Porter was clearly affected by leg injuries throughout their playoff series. He wasn't able to play at all in Game 6. Also, the Wizards have a unique offseason up ahead with the addition of their G League team. There is a lot that goes into creating a new franchise, including a wider scouting operation. They are building this from the ground up, and that has to be considered in any front office decisions. Will they make a big trade? The Wizards have valued continuity as much as any team in the NBA over the past 3 seasons. They have drafted, developed and retained their players, most notably Wall, Bradley Beal and Otto Porter. Those 3 are on major contracts, and the Wizards' future is currently tied to them, to the point that they are set to pay the luxury tax. The Wizards will have to decide this offseason if they want to keep rolling with those guys or do something drastic, i.e., take a big swing at an all-star. This past summer they flirted with the idea of a Paul George trade, but nothing came of it. Is now the time to go all in? In order to make a significant addition to their roster, it would have to be via trade. They are in the luxury tax and won't have big money to spend. But, as recent years have shown, almost every summer there are stars attainable. The speculation has already begun for Kawhi Leonard. Andre Drummond could conceivably be on the market. There is also the chance for a sign-and-trade, and free agency will be flooded with big names, LeBron James among them. Trades of that magnitude have not necessarily been Grunfeld's style in Washington, though he has acquired all-stars via trade before, like Antoine Jamison and Caron Butler. But there's a logical argument for why this should be the year to think big, and it involves Wall's contract. Wall is set to make $19.1 million in 2018-19. The next year his extension kicks in and he is due to make $37.8 million in 2019-20. The salary cap will go up, but not enough to offset that raise entirely. Wall will also be 29 years old that season. If the Wizards want to make a significant trade at some point to give themselves a championship window during Wall's prime, this summer may be the time to do so. Will Morris, Oubre and Gortat stick around? The Wizards have a host of players entering contract years. In the NBA, a contract year means several things in terms of trades. It can be either decision time for a young player who could be sold high for a nice return, or it can mean a veteran is all of a sudden more attractive for a team in search of an expiring deal. With Oubre and Morris, the Wizards will need to make a call on what their futures are in Washington. Though Oubre's numbers dipped this season, he's only 22 years old and has loads of potential. They have to project whether he will be a guy who will not only reach that ceiling, but be worth keeping around eventually for a lot more money. They know what Morris is, but his production and contract in theory make him an asset that could be dealt. Gortat is the most interesting case because of several reasons. For one, they have shopped him in the past and including this season. Secondly, he is admittedly a questionable fit on the roster with Ian Mahinmi in the picture. Gortat has long wondered when his time in DC will be over. It could happen this summer, though the Wizards would have to find a suitor, and that's easier said than done given his age and playing style. How will the G League franchise come together? The Wizards will have a much different offseason than they did in years past because of the Capital City Go-Go are about to enter the equation. They have to choose someone to oversee the front office, hire a coach and sign a whole new roster of players. It has dramatically affected their scouting process throughout this season. They cast a much wider net and scouted a lot more guys than they usually do. Wizards Vice President of Basketball Operations Tommy Shepard is overseeing much of the team's construction. They are deliberating over candidates for the team's general manager position, and it could come from in-house. They have a host of young guys in their front office in basketball operations positions that could fit the bill. Can they keep Scott? The Wizards roster will likely look very different next year, as it always does. Tomas Satoransky is set to be back along with Oubre and Mahimi on their bench. But Jason Smith and Jody Meeks have player options, and Chris McCullough is set to hit free agency. Also entering free agency are Mike Scott, Ty Lawson, Ramon Sessions and Tim Frazier. It would seem unlikely that Sessions or Frazier come back given the roles they played. Lawson is an interesting case because he proved worthy of an NBA roster spot after spending most of the year in China. The Wizards could see him as the solution at backup point guard, and he would likely come very cheap. Scott is the biggest priority, and the Wizards may not have the resource to keep him. Scott was one of the NBA's best comeback stories and may have earned himself a multi-year deal. It wouldn't be surprising if Scott took the success he had and ran with it into free agency to cash in. Working in the Wizards' favor is that he feels comfortable in Washington, just a few hours from where he grew up. After all he went through to get back to this point, sticking with the good thing he has going might be appealing. As you can see, it's going to be another eventful offseason for the Washington Wizards. NBC Sports Washington is on Apple News. Favorite us. The Washington Wizards lost to the Toronto Raptors 102-92 on Friday night in Game 6 of their first-round playoff series. Here's analysis of what went down. It's all over, the long, thick, strange and eventful ride that was the 2017-18 season for the Washington Wizards came to a quiet end on Friday night, as they fell to the Toronto Raptors in Game 6 and did so in familiar fashion. The Wizards' 2016-17 ended largely because the supporting cast around John Wall and Bradley Beal did not do their part in the decisive game. The same thing happened again. Wall had 23 points, 8 assists, and 5 rebounds. Beal had 32 points. But their third leading scorer, Markieff Morris, amassed only 12 points. Wall and Beal scored 30 of the Wizards' 39 second-half points. Washington was down a key player, as Otto Porter was injured, but that is a tough way to lose. They didn't move the ball like they know they should have. The result was just 12 team assists and a 40.5% shooting night. This is the first time they have lost in the first round in the Wall and Beal era. This defeat snapped a streak of 8 straight home playoff wins for the Wizards. The Wizards will enter another off-season with questions about the supporting cast around their 2 star guards. Otto was out. The Wizards played this game without one of their best players, as earlier in the day news broke that Porter would be out indefinitely following a procedure on his left leg to relieve blood pressure from a contusion he suffered sometime in Game 4. Though Porter was limited for much of the series due to injuries to both legs, he left big shoes to fill. Kelly Oubre Jr. got the start in Porter's place, and head coach Scott Brooks gave Tomas Satoransky an extended opportunity as his backup. It was the first time this series that Satoransky played extended minutes since Game 2. The Raptors, conversely, got an important piece back for Game 6 as point guard Fred VanVleet made his return after missing the first 5 games of the series with a right shoulder injury. It was clear early on what the Raptors had been missing, as VanVleet entered and immediately made an impact. VanVleet found Jonas Valanciunas with an alley-oop lob in his first minute of action, and soon after that knocked down his first jumper. He finished with 5 points, 4 assists and 4 rebounds. VanVleet played crucial minutes in the fourth quarter and helped take pressure off their own star guards, DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry. DeRozan had 16 points, his lowest total of the series, but they still had enough to win. Beal was back. Beal had an up-and-down series. He was held in check in the first 2 games, both losses, then unstoppable in Games 3 and 4, both wins. The Wizards got the good version of Beal in Game 6, as he came out firing from a long range. Beal had 14 points in the first half and scored 18 in the second. It was Beal's 18th career postseason game with 25 or more points. With Porter out, Beal's scoring was extra important, and he certainly did his part. The rest of the team, however, barely held up their end of the bargain. Oubre had 3 points and shot 1 for 6. Marcin Gortat had 2 points and 7 rebounds. The bench combined for 20 points compared to 34 for Toronto. If it weren't for Wall and Beal, who logged 40 and 43 minutes, respectively, the Wizards wouldn't have been in this game. To a certain extent that is always the case, but they were a 2-man show on this particular night. The Raptors' depth allowed DeRozan to log only 33 minutes and Lowry only 31. Scott did his thing. One guy who did step up, at least early, was Mike Scott. He came off the bench and lit it up with 8 points in his first 5 minutes on 3 for 4 shooting. Scott ended up with 8, however, as he cooled off in the second half. It was another example of what Scott did so well this season. He provided instant defense off the Wizards' bench, and it will probably get him paid handsomely this summer. With little salary cap room to work with, it might be difficult for the Wizards to match Scott's price. Even if they can't, the signing was a boon for their front office. They took a chance on him with a veteran's minimum contract, and he thoroughly outplayed the deal. Up next, the off-season. The Wizards' season was a roller coaster, and the end result was a disappointment. It will be interesting to see what happens this summer, whether changes are made to their front office, and most notably what happens to their roster. Will they make an aggressive move or bring the usuals back and chalk their 2017-18 season up to injuries? We shall see. NBC Sports Washington is on Apple News.